Okay, well, welcome to my How to Paint series. Stage 1 of this How to Paint Simple Landscape was sky and a basic layout onto the land. Okay, now the next stage will be, now it's dry, will be the distance. Now we've got a distant hedge, woodland, could even be very distant hills. Whatever it is, because the large tree that we're going to have there and the foreground will dominate the scene, anything behind that needs to be cool in colour and less intense. No detail whatsoever. In actual fact, I don't do detail in watercolour, it's just an impression. Now to do that distance, it's always nice to have an area somewhere, perhaps there, where the eye, there's an ultimate distance. Now that needs to be very weak, and then a little bit stronger, but I'm still going to paint over the foreground trees, provided we don't go too dark, then that should work quite well. I'm going to use ultramarine, I've got some in the palette already, and a touch of the vermilion or cadmium red, just to give a bluey grey. That's what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to start out of picture there, well, and keep where this land finishes on the foreground, or the field, sorry, in the distance. Keep that quite straight because you won't see much detail to that. Then as you run away, come away from the large tree. Now we need to add just a tad more water, just to thin that out a touch, just so it's a little lighter as it runs away into that tree. And that is all you need to do for that distant field. And then you need to leave it. Doesn't want touching, you know. It's drying very quickly, I've overrun there, but there you go. That's, even when you're used to painting, that sort of thing happens. But in the whole scheme of things, I'm not going to lift off, I'm not going to touch, I'm just going to leave it. Paper is very hot, so obviously it's drying extremely quickly. Now, in actual fact, the distant field I'm going to leave in that particular tone and colour. I don't see any reason why that needs to be. It's sort of like a late summer scene. The crop is already off of the land, and that could be grazing land that's sad perhaps, so I'm going to leave it at that. So the real next thing is either the large tree or the hedging either side, and I'm going to go in with the large tree to start with. Let's get that large tree established in some sort of form. Now I'm still going to use a fairly large brush, considering you know, it's not a really tiny brush. Try and paint this with larger brushes if you can. Going to use cadmium yellow. I'm going to go into the mix that I painted the rest in. We're not going to waste any paint in that palette. You know, I'm not one of those that keeps cleaning the palette and starting off with fresh paint and all the rest of it. You know, it's if you do that, if you're not careful, it looks a bit disjointed. You know, if I've got a little bit of the other paint in there, it all fits the picture together. So mix up a reasonable amount. Don't want to mix up a small amount. The brush needs to be fully loaded. Cadmium yellow, and I'm going to use Prussian blue for this, because that will give us a nice fresh summer green. There you go. See, it's a nice fresh summer green. A little bit more blue perhaps. That should bring it up to a nice fresh summer green. There we are. Look at that. Lovely. Now I'm going to lose a little bit of that colour on to the tissue, because I don't want the brush too loaded, so that's what I do quite often. Then, starting in the heart of the brush, get the brush completely loaded, starting into the heart of the tree, just stroke down. Right, that's the centre of the tree. Okay, now you begin to get the feel of the way the branches possibly hang out. Yeah, there's one branch, there's another branch there. Now as we go up, trees tend to lose their density the higher up the branches are, and then we have to work quite quickly because it is very, very warm. The quicker you work the better. I mean, I would normally work considerably faster than this, but bearing in mind I need you to see exactly the process. There we are. Work your way down and just produce. You'll need to run that probably a little slower on the video just to see that. Now I'm going in with I'm adding a touch of burnt sienna to that green to give me a slightly deeper, less intense green. And this left hand side is the sunny side, and just before it dries I'm tucking in on the underside of some of those damp areas. See where I'm getting layers now of colour, and that is where we actually have the darker areas within the tree. So you begin to get a bit of tone, a bit of light, medium. Now all we need is the very dark, and that would be a strong mix of Prussian blue and burnt sienna. Now obviously if you're not careful, I mean demonstrating a lot, I have to watch that I don't make the same tree, put the same tree in every picture. You probably noticed this type of tree in the pictures that I've painted. It's purely for demonstration. If I'm out in the field I would no doubt be trying to pick up the specific shape of that tree and not just a tree, but this is a general tree. Now this very dark goes on right onto the bottom edge. Could just break out into that dry area. See where I'm gently dropping that into those damp areas? And normally trees are a little darker in the lower areas where branches has been there we are. Look, that is quite as simple as that. And a little darker there, a little darker on the overhang there, a little darker there, one or two smaller darker patches at the top. You've got to remember watercolour dries lighter, so although it looks extremely dark, and that is the basic shape of a tree: light, medium and dark. That now we need to allow to go dry. You could put the trunk and associated branches that are supporting the leaf areas in at this stage, but when you're learning, I would let it dry first, otherwise it all floods and runs everywhere. So while that's drying, I'm going to add more cadmium to that, so keeping the same part of the palette, and I'm going to produce the hedging. Now we're running out of paint here, which is good in this instance because the hedge is straight where it runs along the edge of the field, but as you go up it opens out and gets rather sort of, see how I'm over painting that distance? Gets rather sort of, as it tapers underneath that tree. I'm not going to carry it right the way along. And can you see the way that gives that impression of an old hedging? And then I'm going to add burnt sienna to that with a touch more Prussian to get a very dark green brown, because underneath that hedging would probably be quite dark. And if you put it in while it's still wet, you can just touch up here and there just to get varying tones in that, really. That's about all it amounts to. And that very light area can just taper off behind the tree itself. Now I'm going to look at the hedging the other side. Now this would generally be in shadow because the light, as you can see, the light is coming from the right. So all I'm going to do for that is start off with, in the same colour, a little bit of brown in there, but let's bring that back to a fresher green by adding more yellow and more blue. There we are. And to start with, it's going to be a little on the lighter side, so a little bit more water, a lighter mix, because there's 3 layers of hedging here, and this, I like the way it's, if I remember rightly, it actually overhung that post into, there we are. See the way I'm shaping the brush and just gently teasing that in. There you go. So that is the very light area. Now all you do is add, as you did with the tree, more blue, more brown, more blue, more brown, and this, probably only want 2 tones in this. That's that, and then it gets quite dark, particularly on the back edge there. And with watercolour we're not using any white, never use white. So the shape you leave here, because this tree was going to be lighter there, will be the shape of the tree that you're painting. So you need to create a nice shape. Notice how I've created a little bit of a spiky sort of shape there. Just add a little bit of dark into that, just to give a tonal value to that. Okay, and then we go light again. So a bit more water, a bit more yellow, that will lighten the mix up, fresher green. And don't overload the brush, so the brush is not too loaded. Then this is slightly larger. And because paper, watercolour paper, is textured, I like the textured paper. This is Bockingford, this is a pad from Pink Pig. It's a Bockingford pad. I do like Bockingford, it's quite an interesting, cheap sort of paper, not inexpensive, I'm saying cheap. It's I'm not meaning cheap in as much as cheap and cheerful. It is a nice paper to use actually. And then, so I've been light, medium, now I'm going to go very dark again, just to try and get, and I will go back in to that, add a bit more blue to this, because I want to be a little darker on that back edge of this tree here, just before it completely dries. There you go. Particularly on the overhang there. 1 or 2 little touches there. There we go. So that shows up the other tree then, and then this dark will come in again there. And this time I'm tucking fairly well in. Notice I'm leaving lighter areas. Just blend it together at the base. There you go. Quite dark at the bottom. And then finally, this one is going to be dark. Let's have a dark tree on the outside, or hedge, as a hedge really, on the outside edge there, and it is the highest of the 3. That helps to give perspective, running away into the distance, and that's overhanging. It's actually slightly darker than that foreground tree, or middle tree I mean. But running out of picture, not too concerned about that. Not to overdo whatever's running out of picture. Just a little bit darker here and there. As it's beginning to dry, it dries lighter. It blends a bit, so you need some darker colour. But basically, that's pretty much it. See how soft that has dried now. When it's wet, it looks really dark and heavy. So don't be afraid to go in quite strong. The next stage really is the field is in. Let's put a bit of greenery on to the edge of the field, because as I said, it's the farmer has left that and for the wildlife, which is good. So I'm going to paint. It's got to be lighter than the hedging. Paint right across the trunk area where the trunk will be, and because I've done that side, I'm going to paint a little bit that side and a little bit in the top of the centre where the farm machinery are yet to tyres do not run on that area. And then we paint down the bank. Just got to remember, you paint the contour. So if there's a bank, you paint down. If it's domed, you paint round, and if it goes up, you paint up. Now I'm going to add a bit more brown to that, just to give a little bit. I like to have a bit of earthy feel to this green area, particularly there. There you go. Now I'm going to add more yellow. Now it's a nice sort of fresh yellow, that, and quite simple. That paints up, mustn't forget that. This paints over as a dome shape, and this paints down. So you've got to remember the contour of the ground. You paint the contour of the ground. There you go. Now I'm just going to go darker in the foreground, because that in effect will be sort of like my shadow area really. And I'm going to use Prussian blue for that. Plenty of blue required in that, and we go. And this is where the contour of the bank can be seen, because I'm painting across and down. This will be over, I'm painting the top, over and eventually down, and because it's high you'll have a shadow along the right hand side. Right. There you go. And this side, well, it's mainly light, but there will be a touch of shadow to the right hand side of that. But of course here I'm going dark, and that'll be, I'll tell you why at the end. You know, it also brings the track forward. Like I went darker there, that is in keeping with the field. And then to finish this one off, let's put the trunk and branches in of the main tree. I'm not going to put many. It's going to be quite void of branches, because there's a summer tree. It's completely full with leaf. So that's all dry now. Now where you put the branches is the gaps, the lighter areas that would reveal the trunk. If I were to just paint the trunk and branches, all the leaf would be behind. There's some leaf behind, there's some leaf at the side, and there's some leaf in front of the trunk and branches. So all you do, you use it fairly dark, be quite dark, because that tree will be in shadow from the overhanging leafing. And the way, it's a good trick this, while that's still damp, just with a damp brush I'm going to run across and let that sink in, and that's part of the shadow. See where we begin to get a film of shadow? And it's melted the trunk into the landscape. So, you know, there's a bit of wet into wet work there. The next stage will be any trunk you feel you'll see here. Well, probably see a bit of that trunk there, with possibly, I always like to have a branch, fairly meaty branch, breaking off of that. And that may very well extend to support some leafing there. Next will be the branch, the trunk there. Remember that does tend to taper, so don't make it any wider, and if necessary less wide. Then it would probably break out there, even more narrow. Okay. And probably a branch may break out there that supports that. There we go. And I would say it's quite wide there, and we have quite a split within the branching at the top. Don't want to show all of it, just the odd little hint. Sometimes you get a little, you know, a dead branch or whatever, and there's leafing there, so I'm going to assume that that branch actually comes from an area within the greenery. And certainly there, I mean, there may be a branch coming